Here's a quote from the foreword to the new book. A reporter's supposed lack of bias, which I suspect is now the great sickness of our Western press and television, has become the antidote to personal feeling, the excuse for all of us to avoid the truth. But Robert, you know, what if people aren't actually interested in your feelings and what you think about it? Well, what about if they just want to read the paper to find out what happened?
Look, if they want to read Reuters, it's there. If they want to read the AP, it's there. If they want to read...
Well, it is for us. It's not for most people.
Well, then they can pick up any morning newspaper, by and large, except the Independent, where they'll find a bit more. Look, I think the point is that it isn't a question of the feeling. It's the issue of, you know, the American School of Journalism, you have to give 50% of each story to each side in the dispute. And, you know, that's okay in a football match, very impartial. You're reporting a football match, or a public inquiry into an M40 extension in the north of England or Birmingham. But when you're dealing with the Middle East and you have a massive human tragedy, I think you have to be impartially on the side of those who suffer injustice and those who are being occupied and oppressed. That doesn't mean politically, it doesn't mean you have to support... I found Arafat such an arrogant man. I realised that I've never been so savage about anyone in my previous book, but Arafat, that was pointed out to me, I hadn't realised it. And it certainly doesn't mean you have to be pro-Israeli. You don't have to be pro-Iranian, which is pretty difficult most of the time, and you certainly don't have to be pro-Bush, which is impossible most of the time. But I do think that you have to have a moral, I hate to use that cliche, compass. I think, you know, if you walk out of this building and you see an atrocity, you're angered by it, you have feelings. Well, we should be able to have feelings too. We're not machines that sit out in the Middle East saying, well, you know, scorecard today, 3 Palestinians, 1 Israeli. The spokesman for Israeli Defense Forces says X. The PLO, no, a Palestinian doctor claims that X for Y. Goodbye, I'm going home. Cup of tea. That's it. That's not what we should be doing.
Britain bears a heavy responsibility.
Unfortunately, it does, yes. The odd thing is that you keep finding all these people who were totally betrayed by us because they believed Lawrence of Arabia and independence of the Arabs. And they keep saying, if only the Europeans would help us. And one of the problems is, I think, that the oppression and the feeling that we can always conquer them, which we regularly do, is such that they've come to feel that we actually are in some way all conquering and superior. I gave a talk at Nabatea in southern Lebanon with a lot of Amal and Hezbollah in the audience and their families on the Arabic edition of my earlier book. And at the very end, this guy stands up and said, please will you tell us as a foreigner what's going to happen in Lebanon? And I said, it is doomed if you keep asking people like me what the future of Lebanon is. Go down to Jibshit and ask your neighbours, and then you won't have any more foreigners here dominating you. But this is something that we, you see, have sowed in the soil, I think. We've allowed them to feel that they are so oppressed by our cultural presence, our tanks, our armies, our swords, and so on, that they actually have come to believe it, which is a great tragedy, because they've got to solve it. You know, how do you deal with the Middle East? We've got to leave.
Apart from simply leaving, and you know, with the exception of 2,500 troops, whatever it is now, outside Basra, we've pretty much left in that sense. And of course, the residual presence of Tony Blair in the American Colony Hotel in Jerusalem.
Who hasn't been to Gaza yet.
Yeah. Apart from all the, he'd have to talk to Hamas if he went there.
Exactly.
Apart from all those things, what do you think that Britain should do now?
Look, it isn't just Britain, Jeremy. I think that the West has got to have a mature social, educational, cultural relationship with the peoples of the Middle East. We keep saying we're going to go there and we're going to give them, you know, packets of human rights off our supermarket shelves and lots of democracy, and the freedom they ask for when you ask them tends to be they want freedom from us, which we don't want to give them. And as we arrive with all our democracies, we always, without exception, Napoleon did the same in the 18th century. He promised freedom to the people of Cairo from the Pashas. We did the same in 1917 in Iraq. General Angus Maud said, we come here as conquerors, as liberators, not as conquerors, to free you from generations of tyranny. And always we go with our Apache helicopters and our Humvees and our Abrams tanks and our swords and our horses. And we, you know, we've got to stop having this military domination of the Middle East. There was an Iraqi baker asked me once, he said, Mr. Robert, why, when he said you, he meant me, the West. You see, here we are again with symbolic. He said, why are you in Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Israel, Turkey, Bahrain, Kuwait, you see, and still he goes on, Oman, and so on, Bahrain. And I couldn't give him a reply because it's a kind of iron curtain that runs, it actually runs from Greenland, Iceland, if you think of the American forces, Britain, Germany, Bosnia, Greece, connects up with Turkey and goes right way down almost to Somalia. What's it for? I mean, these are the issues, I think, and we still don't know, I don't know what the answer is. What's beyond it? China, Russia, India? But we've got to leave the Middle East militarily. We've got to get out.
That in Britain, the role of the press is very important because it's come to play the role of parliamentary opposition.
Yeah, because the Tories voted for the war.
Yeah, but, you know, is that really the job of the media, to be
No,
the parliamentary
no.
opposition? We're not elected, we're
be.
given soapboxes, but you said that it's come to play that role.
Because the Tories voted for the war.
No, so you think then that that's not a role that the media ought to play?
In principle, we should have an opposition that's worth voting for. We haven't. That's the problem. You know, the press, it's not the fault of journalists that we've ended up as a voice of the people in a way we never intended. I mean, you know,
But
you had a voice of the...
You see yourself as that now, though, don't you?
No, 1 million English people saw themselves as that just before the 2003 war, but nothing happened.
They don't have a platform on a major national newspaper in the way that you do.
Oh, yes, they do, because we talked to them, but I don't think Tony Blair did,
yeah.
You see. That's the problem,
But
Jeremy.
look, Robert, you say here, my own journalism over the past 5 years has concentrated more and more on the sheer hypocrisy of the political, military, journalistic nexus of power which is deployed to fool us. What do you think about the surge? The consensus growing in the States appears to be it works.
Well, I was talking to my colleague Patrick Coburn, whose book on Muqtada Sadr I strongly recommend to everybody. Patrick's view is it hasn't, that the worst thing has already happened, and it's true. The walls are up across Baghdad, a massive version of what happened in Belfast, and everyone has been divided into sectarian blocks. So there are fewer people to kill now, so it worked. I mean, you know, I think this is something, you see, which is about journalism too, is the way in which militarily we want to divide people. Now we want the insurgents to kill their colleagues by paying them and making them, calling them another organization. And we're always dividing people up, you know. I mean, our newspaper maps, Shiites at the bottom, Sunnis in the middle in the famous triangle that looks more like an octagon, Kurds at the top. We do the same with Lebanon. Shiites at the bottom, of course, again, Shiites on the right, Druze in the middle, Sunnis at Sidon and Tripoli, Maronites north of Beirut, and we sometimes put colour-coded in. The British Army, you will remember, Jeremy, used to have maps of Belfast, which were colour-coded. Obviously, Catholic was green, Protestant was orange, and if you were, you know, stupid enough to intermarry and have a mixed area, it was coloured the sort of colour of a very fine brown sherry, you know. But you know, and this is... You know, what we do, we make them, remind them of who's in the next village, but we don't do this to us. I mean, I can draw you a very good map of Washington, black and white. I could actually almost draw you a good map of Bradford in ethnic origin. I could certainly do you a map of Toronto, in which a whole area of the city called Mississauga should be green for Muslims. In Montreal, the English-French divide actually runs down the metro line. But we don't print those pictures because we live in this superlative, superior society where we don't acknowledge.
I guess in Montreal or Toronto, they don't kill each other all that often, do they?
No, but we use these maps to encourage them to kill each other, do we not? To remind them where we... Why don't we just drop them by air over Baghdad to help, you know?
Who do you think is going to be in the dock? And do you think those people would be the killers?
I think Ba'ath Party security arranged his death. I don't think Bashar al-Assad did. Just after... I was 400 metres from the explosion. I saw Hariri on fire on the ground. I knew him quite well. And in the paper, in the following 3 days later, I named the top 4 Lebanese officers working for the Syrians whom I believed were very close to the killing, must have known that it might happen or would happen and was going to happen. As a result of that, and I mean, the fact that this following happened is some proof of what we're talking about. A Lebanese army general asked to meet me at Paul's coffee shop downtown in Beirut. They have a French Paul's in Beirut. And he arrived in you know, cross stars in his general's uniform, and he said, "Robert, don't use your landline, it's being tapped." I mean, I think it's tapped by, you know, who knows. I mean, I'm not going to say Bin Laden's at 55 Acacia Avenue. You know, there's not much point in worrying about it. But he said, I said, "Who's tapping it?" And he said, "The écouteur, the listening department of the Sûreté Générale, the General Security." And I said, who's doing it? And he said, "General Tufaili." And then I said, well, what about my mobile? He said, that's all right. And I said, how do you know? He said, because I tap the mobiles and I'm not tapping yours at the moment. But I then printed Tufayli's name in the paper and said, because the Amn al Couture department makes so many mistakes, my home number is 370615 Beirut, just in case you've got the wrong number to tap. But clearly that tap was put on by Tufayli, who's now happily, no longer in his job, who was another pro-Syrian officer. So why were the Syrian side of the military nexus in Lebanon so concerned that I was putting these names in? Because they realised that there was a connection.